It has been days since the earth has ceased to shake. The nearby mountains, ever casting their imposing shadows over the bay, have been spewing threatening plumes of smoke and rivers of fire, but were now resting. The authorities had raised the alarm in the previous weeks, but now there was nothing to worry about. They had reassured the people on the coast that they could return to their own business, and so they did. The sun had already set. The fishermen, peasants, and craftsmen in the village were already heading towards their homes, or perhaps to a tavern to be comforted by the warmth of a nice cup of sake. But out of the dark, there came the noises. First, a rolling rumble, followed by a thunderous splash. The first two sounds had been quite distant, and in the dark, no one could understand where they had come from. A third, roaring sound ensued, and it came from the sea. It grew louder and louder until a wall of water, a tsunami, smashed into the coast. It was May the 21st, 1792, when more than 15,000 lives were lost in a matter of minutes. Buried under the earth, drowned in the water, their fates sealed by fire. This is the story of Mount Unzen and the Shimabara catastrophe, Japan's deadliest volcanic eruption. Japan is no stranger to seismic and volcanic activity. The country is located over 4 colliding tectonic plates, which are responsible for unleashing 1/5 of the entire world's major earthquakes. Moreover, it is the location of 111 active volcanoes, about 7% of the planet's total number. Some of these volcanoes form the massive Unzen volcanic complex, which is sometimes referred to as Mount Unzen and portrayed in non-specialized media as a single volcano. Now, we'll go along with the toponym Unzen for simplicity's sake today. The Unzen is located on the Shimabara Peninsula, near the eponymous town. The area is today part of the Nagasaki Prefecture in Kyushu on the southwestern tip of Japan. The Unzen volcanic complex covers an area of about 500 square kilometers, and it features not one, not two, not even three, but 4 of nature's frightening weapons of mass destruction. These are Mount Kunogasa to the north, Kusenbu on the south, plus Fugandake and Maiyama in the eastern central portion of the massif. At the end of the 18th century, the latter stood at 760 meters high, directly overlooking the eastern coast of the peninsula and the port of Shimabara. All of these volcanoes are categorized as stratovolcanoes, that is, conical landforms formed by layers of material deposited during successive volcanic eruptions. Fugandake and Maiyama are described as being a lava dome complex. This is a type of land formation in which magma is squeezed out of a narrow crater vent, piling up, in NASA's words, into a muffin-shaped form. But muffins are delicious and awesome. Lava domes, not so much. As they grow in size, they become unstable until the front section collapses into massive landslides. Moreover, the collapse may release the most violent type of volcanic eruptions, a huge pyroclastic flow. This term derives from the Greek words for fire and broken in pieces. In fact, pyroclastic flows are dense ejections of solidified lava, ash, and hot gases, which can move at a speed of 400 kilometers per hour. In rainy seasonal climates, as is the case in southern Japan, pyroclastic flows may forge an unholy alliance with the element of water. During heavy downpours, the combined effect of rains and volcanic projectiles can unleash a lahar, a type of deadly mudslide. Have you ever wondered how easy it is for someone to dig up your personal information online? It's frighteningly simple, but hey, let's not panic, let's get proactive. Today we're talking about our sponsor Incogni and how they help keep your personal data private. So, what's the deal with data brokers? Well, these companies collect and sell your personal information, everything from your name and address to your browsing habits. It is a goldmine for scammers and marketers, but it's a nightmare for everyone else. Imagine someone using your details to take out a loan in your name. It can be pretty scary stuff, right? And that's why you do need Incogni. Incogni acts like a data shield. They contact data brokers on your behalf and request the removal of your personal information. They even handle any objections and keep at it, ensuring your data stays off the market. Getting started with Incogni is super easy. You create an account and you tell them whose data to remove, you grant them permission to work for you, and then you just relax while they take care of it. Try Incogni risk-free for 30 days and see the difference for yourself. Use the promo code PLACES at incogni.com/places and you'll get 60% off an annual plan. Take control of your personal data today. Thanks to Incogni for sponsoring, and now back to it. The Unzen complex has always been an active one, sowing death and destruction even before the 1792 catastrophe that we're talking about today. According to the Smithsonian Institution's Global Volcanism Program, 6 confirmed eruptions took place from 7050 BC to 650 BC, with a margin of error of up to 3,000 years for the oldest events. After a long period of inactivity, the Unzen erupted again in 850 AD. It then lay dormant for 8 centuries before reawakening twice in the span of just a few months, once in December of 1663 and once again in April of 1664. The effects of the early eruption are not known in detail. We only know that the northeastern wall of Mount Fugendake collapsed, releasing an outpouring of lava which flowed 1 kilometer to the north. In April 1664, Fugendake was again to blame as a release of lava combined with seasonal rains, thus creating a lahar or mudslide. The lahar flowed down towards the Akamatsu Valley and flooded the village of Antoku, resulting in 30 deaths. The Unzen complex is related to another number of deaths taking place in the Shimabara Peninsula, although it cannot be held directly responsible. By the first half of the 17th century, Japan had already come into contact with European travelers, including Christian missionaries. The shogunate did not approve of the spread of this new religion and thus took to persecuting and torturing Japanese Christians. Between 1627 and 1632, Shimabara's feudal lord, Matsukuru Shigemasa, devised a new, brutal method of torture and execution. The Unzen Massif was, and is, dotted with hot springs and pools. In some of them, water can reach boiling point due to underground volcanic activity. Thus, Shigemasa had captured Christians dragged by these pools and forced them to renounce their religion. Those who refused would be showered with the boiling waters or directly thrown into the hot springs. According to Dr. Robin George Andrews, experimental volcanologist, quote, with acidities reaching that of stomach acids and at boiling temperatures, the victims died an extremely painful death. Their nerve endings quickly burned off and their skin was leatherized and their organs quickly failed. Shigemasa's brutal methods of volcanic execution fostered anger amongst the local peasants, not only those of Christian faith. Eventually, discontent erupted into the full-blown Shimabara Rebellion of 1637, one of the largest ever staged on Japanese soil. The Tokugawa shogunate retaliated against the rebels, and in the subsequent conflict, almost 50,000 troops and rebels were killed over a span of 4 months. The Unzen volcanoes rumbled once more in 1698, although this eruption is not 100% confirmed according to the Smithsonian. What is confirmed, and very well documented, is the catastrophe of May 1792. This is remembered as the deadliest volcanic eruption in Japanese history. But as we shall see, the staggering loss of life was caused by a complex chain of events, of which the eruption was only one of many elements. The first link in the chain took place from November the 3rd to December the 5th, 1791. This was a swarm of earthquakes, their epicenter being located underneath Chijiwa Bay to the west of the Unzen complex. Based on records at the time, the Japanese Meteorological Agency, or JMA, estimated their intensity at 5 to 6 of their scale. This scale is not based on the objective magnitude of an earthquake like the Richter scale, but rather on observable effects similar to the Mercalli classification. So, what happens at the level 6 intensity? Well, first of all, people find it difficult to keep standing and may fall to the ground, especially if outdoors. Then, larger solid buildings will suffer heavy damage, while less sturdy houses will collapse outright. Small to medium cracks will appear on the ground, causing landslides on hills. At this stage, no landslides nor victims were recorded. But clearly, something was going on beneath Unzen. The volcanic complex was awakened in January 1792 when a column of smoke erupted from a minor crater, the Jigukuato. The following month, it was time for Mount Fugendake to burst into life, releasing a large cloud of ash. Another big earthquake shook the peninsula, although the intensity has not been estimated. At the end of February, Fugendake released its encore, and this time it released more than just ash. A flow of lava spewed from its northeastern side, sliding into the Anasako Tani Valley and covering a length of 2 kilometers. This was not a one-off event. Fugendake continued to release lava throughout March and April, slowly encroaching toward the houses at the foot of the mountain. In total, the lava flow had an estimated volume of 20 million cubic meters. That's equivalent to a capacity of 8,000 Olympic swimming pools. Although this wasn't chlorinated water, it was molten rock at a temperature of 1,000 degrees Celsius. No wonder the inhabitants in the area must have felt relieved when the incandescent river stopped just 500 meters from their homes. But bad news for them, the worst was yet to come. Around April 20th, the Unzen shuddered under the 4th eruption in the span of 4 months. This time, only steam blew up in the atmosphere, but the following day, a second seismic swarm struck the peninsula. This time, Mount Maeyama, the lava dome, started rumbling and falling rocks rolled down its slopes. In the town of Shimabara, wooden houses collapsed while large cracks appeared on the ground, and even the walls of the local castle were damaged. It appears that from April the 21st to April the 24th, the area was shaken by over 300 earthquakes, the latter of which may have caused a minor landslide on the side of Kusunoki Daira, a small hill. Thus far, the damage had been relatively contained, and again, there were no victims that we know of. Unfortunately, there are no records of individual accounts compiled by the inhabitants of Shimabara, therefore we don't know what their reaction was to the past terrifying weeks. We can only speculate that they must have been frightened. But based on what happened later, we can conjecture that no large-scale evacuation actually took place. From April 29th to May the 20th, the area returned to a state of calm. The Earth stayed put, and the mountains did not try to ignite the skies. So that's nice. Gradually, normality was restored and everybody returned to their daily lives. The sun dawned on May the 21st, and then it started to set at around 7 p.m. Another day had gone without incident, and the residents went to relax after hours of work. Then, at around 8 in the evening, another cruel link in that chain of death was forged. Probably weakened by the months of eruptions and earthquakes, one side of Mount Maayama crumbled, detaching itself from the main formation. With the sound of rolling thunder, a massive landslide started racing down the slopes, heading towards the sea. The velocity of the avalanche has been estimated by the International Consortium on Landslides, or ICL, at 18 kilometers per hour, which might not sound like a lot, but the ICL categorizes this as an extremely rapid landslide. Besides, 18 kilometers per hour is enough to outrun most people. More importantly, the debris detached from Maayama had an enormous volume, estimated to be 100 million cubic meters. That's 40 times the Great Pyramid of Giza. After the collapse, Maayama's size was reduced from a height of 760 meters to only 400. This enormous volume of rocks, mud, and other debris descended towards the coast, leveling farms and villages in its path, leaving behind a trail of destruction and death. Then the avalanche hit the town of Shimabara, taking its residents by complete surprise. Around 5,000 people were killed in a matter of seconds, swept away by the fury of the mountain. When they ran out of ground to devastate, those 100 million cubic meters of matter plunged into the sea, initiating the last phase of the catastrophe. The port of Shimabara overlooked the small internal Ariake Sea. On the other side, the inhabitants of the Hygo province were still unaware of the tragedy unfolding. Sometime between 8 and 9 p.m., they must have heard the roaring sound growing from the sea. It was a giant wave, a tsunami, generated by the landslide as it had plunged into the waters of the Ariake. The liquid wall reached a height of 10 to 20 meters, but at least in one location, the town of Futsu, it grew to a staggering 57 meters. The freak wave then crashed onto the coasts of Hygo province and the nearby islands, causing a further 5,000 deaths. All four elements had been unleashed on the Shimabara province during those terrifying weeks. First, fire and incandescent air, then earth, finally water, relentless in its pursuit of destruction. After hitting the coast of Hygo, the tsunami bounced back, rushing towards Shimabara town. The surviving inhabitants, injured and stunned, were thus taken by surprise when the last act of the calamity unfolded. In probably less than 1 hour, a total of 15,153 people had lost their lives, of which 10,139 were in Shimabara and 5,014 were in Hygo. The events of May the 21st, 1792 were documented by the authorities at the time and later reconstructed by volcanologists and seismologists. Illustrators and cartographers also captured the devastation of the event, representing the profound impact on the landscape. An entire mountain had almost halved in size, and the avalanche of debris had dotted Ariake Sea with numerous new islands. Moreover, the people of Shimabara memorialized their loved ones and the tragedy that had fallen upon them by dotting the area with dozens of funeral memorials as well as commemorative stone pillars. These are called tsunami domishi, and they mark the places reached by the tsunami, showing how far inland the wave had traveled. What we're missing are written accounts and oral histories passed on by the survivors. This lack of collective memory was remarked upon by Hiroshi Sato at Mount Bandai Eruption Memorial Museum and Professor Yuichi Ono of Tohoku University. To quote them, "The earliest historical record of the Mount Maayama debris avalanche/eruption, which belonged to the Shimabara domain, was written for and managed by the government and thus was not shared with the local residents. Therefore, the memory of this disaster was rarely passed down to future generations." The authors point out that the Shimabara Peninsula had already suffered a previous catastrophe in 1664, albeit a smaller one, caused by the Unzen complex. Also in that case, no memory of the event was passed down to the next generations. Had the history of the events been preserved, perhaps the inhabitants and local authorities would have picked up on the gravity of the early signs of impending disaster. Instead, no evacuation was conducted in May 1792, which may be responsible for the high number of deaths. Quoting again, "The lesson is that in the event of a large-scale disaster, it is important to preserve the remains of the disaster and at the same time keep a record of the stories from the early stage of recovery to the reconstruction so that they can be passed on from generation to generation. This would enhance the disaster prevention capability of people in vulnerable areas." Despite the lack of written or oral memories amongst the community, official records were preserved, allowing modern volcanologists and seismologists to keep a close eye on the Unzen complex. And good job they did, as 2 centuries later, trouble was brewing again. Starting in 1989, seismic activity was recorded around Unzen Massif, with volcanic tremors raising the level of alarm on July 4th, 1990. 20 days later, an earthquake storm took place, but it only reached an intensity of 3 on the JMA scale. This means that the quake was enough for houses to shake, but no serious damage occurred. A second swarm propagated through the peninsula on October the 23rd, but again, it did not breach the level 3 barrier. Then, on November the 17th, the 2 craters of Jigakwato and Kujikushima suddenly erupted, spewing columns of smoke mixed with ash up to a height of 400 meters. This sudden jump scare was followed by yet more earthquakes, but their intensity was low. All in all, no damages or injuries were reported. The Unzen complex erupted once more on February the 12th, 1991. This time, the explosion was powerful enough to open a new crater on the northeastern side of Mount Fukundake and to spew a column of ash smoke several hundred meters high. The volcanoes of Unzen had by now established a pattern of calm followed by intense activity, and also in 1991, they stuck to their script. From May the 12th, a series of earthquakes shook the summit of the Fukundake, culminating with the appearance of a new lava flow on May the 20th. This was followed by the most terrifying manifestations of volcanic power, a pyroclastic flow. The first one exploded on May the 24th, luckily without consequences. But the second one, on June the 3rd, was a completely different affair. As mentioned earlier, the Fukundake is a lava dome complex prone to breaking down and releasing massive pyroclastic flows in the process. And that's exactly what happened. The dome collapsed, launching its cloud of hot gases and solidified lava down the slope. It engulfed 179 buildings in the nearby villages, causing the death of 43 citizens. Sadly, these deaths would have been completely preventable. A large presence of journalists had concentrated at the foot of Fukundake since May to document the early appearance of lava. Most of the casualties claimed by the June the 3rd flow, in fact, were reporters, cameramen, and curious bystanders who had been attracted by the media presence. By now, Japanese authorities had learned their lesson. In a vital move on June the 7th, they ordered the evacuation of the area, with a total of 11,000 people being displaced by September. That decision had come at the right time and was enacted swiftly. Over the following week, in June, more landslides and pyroclastic flows heavily damaged a total of 425 buildings, which were then empty of their inhabitants. The Fukundake continued to spew out fresh lava, which quickly solidified into lobes, which were stratified on top of each other to form a new dome. These lobes were highly unstable nonetheless, and on August the 13th, one of them started collapsing. It finally came down on September the 15th, releasing yet another pyroclastic flow. The incandescent mass traveled 5.5 kilometers in little more than 1 minute, slamming into the Onakoba Primary School and setting it on fire. The entire building was destroyed. Luckily, it had already been evacuated. From 1992 to 1996, the Fukundake resumed its personal war against Shimabara, this time with a new ally. Pyroclastic flows and Lahar mudslides tormented the residents, and more than 1,300 houses suffered heavy damage. Once again, emergency services had done their duty, evacuating 5,600 locals. Only 1 casualty was recorded. Overall, during this period of intense activity, the Fukundake atop the Unzen complex had discharged 200 million cubic meters of lava and shot out some 9,400 pyroclastic flows. That was some serious firepower, with the potential of creating much worse damage than the catastrophe of 1792. Now, based on what we've learned today, you might be led to believe that it's best to avoid the Unzen complex. After all, who would want to face avalanches, tsunamis, and blasts of hot gases traveling at 400 kilometers an hour? But we would be doing a disservice to the Unzen if we didn't point out that the area is simply absolutely stunning and bursting with natural beauty. Since 1934, in fact, it has been part of the Unzen Amakusa National Park. Its official website describes it as a park full of contrasts, from smoldering volcanoes covered in delicate flowers to Gothic churches and secluded fishing coves. This geothermal hotbed is surrounded by a stunning archipelago where you can watch dolphins, dive, and even learn about hunting dinosaur fossils. Volcanoes, by their nature, are the origin of one of nature's greatest paradoxes. The soil surrounding them is ripe with the byproduct of lava and volcanic ash, minerals, and nutrients which fertilize fertilize the earth and favor the growth of luscious plants and plentiful crops. From this perspective, volcanic formations such as Unzen are bringers of life and abundance, which explains why so many people still choose to live in the area. But volcanoes, by their nature, can also be unpredictable harbingers of sudden devastation, subject to the unruly shaking of the earth. In a matter of seconds, they can destroy what generations have built. It is a sad truth, which the Japanese people know very well. Experience has taught authorities how to minimize the damage of nature's wrath, hence the importance of recorded memory, mentioned by the already quoted Hiroshi Sato and Professor Ono. But even so, nature can still have the upper hand. More than 2 centuries after the Shimabara catastrophe on March the 11th, 2011, Japan was struck by another similar combination of disasters, the Tohoku earthquake and tsunami, which also led to the Fukushima meltdown. The death toll of this later tragedy was similar to that of the Unzen event, with an estimated 15,893 casualties. Unlike the 1792 event, in this case, memory was preserved by ordinary citizens, many of whom composed disaster poems to cope with their grief. And we'd like to end today's episode with one of these poems, Do Not Tremble, by Toshika Hirata. It may not relate directly to the Shimabara catastrophe, but it captures the essence of a survivor struck by the irrational cruelty of a disaster. It trembles. It is trembling again today. I did not know that the earth is an unruly cradle, a cruel cradle that lets neither adult nor child sleep. Earth, it is enough for you simply to keep spinning happily. Leave the trembling to wind-blown flowers and laundry hanging in the yard. You should simply spin innocently.